So, welcome to lecture number 11 in network security. So last time we started with the viruses, and their core characteristic is that they self-replicate. Let's have a look at the case study, how it behaves, and observe how the patterns that we saw is also taking place. So especially the elements of metamorphic viruses that change during the time, that maybe use a decryptor, that change their code from before copying themselves to another machine or to another file. So let's have a look at this virus Win32 Simile. So what it does is that's a portable executable. So it's a self-running file. One moment. Sorry. So it's a self-running file, so you don't need to install it. And what it does is it already knows that some of the files are considered very carefully by antivirus programs, and these files are omitted, so they are not attacked at all. Okay, that's one approach, and the rest, even then, is only just infected with a probability of 50%. So that doesn't have a predictable behavior. So it tries to not always cause harm, to not be suspicious all the time. Then it uses also some kind of entry point obscuring. So where does it jump in? So what is the entry point of the file code? So there are some function calls that are regularly in the file itself, calling some DLL, some kind of libraries, and it replaces one of those to jump to the decryptor of the virus. So it just by random selects an anyway official and legal jump to a method, to an external library, but it replaces it to jump to its decryptor, and basically after the decryptor and all execution is finished, then jumps to the appropriate DLL. And also this decryptor can be in various positions, data part, program part, so there's not a clear position where it is located. Okay, so then we have also the elements of metamorphism inside. So what it does, if you have a metamorphic virus, what you want to do is you want to change your signature, you want to use how you look like from copy to copy. So what it does is it takes it disassembles itself, so it tries to basically have some kind of code basis it can operate on. Then the code is optimized and minimized, so it tries to get rid of everything unnecessary that is not part of the core virus code. So it's bloated anyway, so it's tried to optimize it and minimize it to get to the original form. Then it's split in single blocks that conceal how the function types are connected. So there's a jump back and forth, basically to hide what's going on, so that you don't see how the connections are. And every block is modified by insertion of redundant operations. Later on, the next time, these redundant operations are optimized and minimized, so they are get rid of again. Okay, and then the code is assembled and can be copied to the next file. So it rearranges itself, it remodifies itself to be less detectable. And even then, to hide being detected by dynamic antivirus programs that run the software in a sandbox and observe how it's behaving. In 1 out of 4 cases it does nothing, so that even then the observation leads to nothing. And the malicious routine that would be maybe detected by the sandbox also runs only at specific dates. So by this, even at regular dates, if the virus code is executed, nothing specific, nothing suspicious happens. Okay, so far for the virus. So basically it's a cat and mouse game where viruses try to conceal their identity, their patterns, their common identifiable parts. So they want to basically recreate themselves every time they copy themselves, so that there's no common pattern that can be easily detected. And it's quite difficult to identify. So basically static analysis just looks for specific patterns as we saw at the example of Snort in the intrusion detection systems, is not really capable of identifying these file patterns, these instruction patterns, because they change every time. So typically you have to run it in a sandbox, and then even then the malicious code is not activated just at certain dates. So you just really have to be lucky to be aware when the right dates are. Okay, let's go to worms. Worms are a little bit different than viruses. They have many commonalities. So what they do, they have in common that they spread to other systems as well, so that they want to replicate, but they spread through a computer network. So in contrast to viruses that spread on the single machine from one file to another, they try to infect other computers. One moment. So they want to attack other hosts. Typically what they want to do is if there's some kind of host with some kind of exposed functionality, so there are some open ports, it tries to affect that machine and then to reach out to new hosts and to those instances that are running there, so to affect them. So spreads from machine to machine. So what do you have to do? You have to first select new targets. So where do you send your which machines, which hosts identified by an IP address do you try to address? Doesn't have to be an IP address. It can be also just to spread to widen the application scope. It can also be an email program that is affected by an email. It can also be some kind of social network activity. Maybe SMS a little bit more difficult probably, but it can. It's not limited to pure IP based networks. It can also be based on telephone networks, but very rarely. So you need to have some kind of protocol in place that is then utilized, and some vulnerable service, so offering that protocol to attack that. And then once the new machine is infected, then it is spreading further on. So selection of new targets, second, transfer to new system, and third, remote control and update. So you must maintain control. So typically the main goal is to get control over those machines, and by this exponential factor, by the self-spreading characteristics, you get a pool of controlled machines that is growing and growing over time, and you want to be able to update them with new functionalities as an attacker, so that you can use them for various purposes. Okay, so how would you select new targets? So let's assume you attacked a host, and you manage to attack this vulnerable system. Now you have taken control over a specific service. How would you identify new targets? What would be some option? So let's say you wanted to attack some kind of company or some kind of state organization, some Gemeinde, some kind of municipal coordination service. What would you do? Some of the workers there plugged in, somehow accepted some mail, whatever, and executed something there.
You can broadcast.
Okay, broadcast, yeah. Yeah, broadcasting is one option. Sometimes the services might not be. Okay, so let's say broadcast would be one option. Any further idea? Do you have maybe some information on that machine that you could use? So some kind of contact lists that you could utilize. What kind of contact lists could you have?
Email?
Yeah, email. I mean, if somebody accepted some kind of bogus email and was able to, I don't know, ask the person to open some malicious file to look at nice cat videos or so, then you could maybe access the email address book of that person and then send new emails to that addresses, claiming that's a very urgent file to open. happens sometimes, so I'm not sure. Did you experience it sometimes that you got some email from some persons that looks suspicious? No? No?
In the company, they send us some random phishing mails
Oh,
to check if the employees are.
that's right. So employees sometimes also hire companies, other companies, external companies to test the resilience of their employees to phishing mails, yes. What you can also, of course, do is to check, let's say, in the IP range. So if I know I have an IP address, I don't know, 1234/24, that means that the first 24 bits are representing the subnet that I'm in, and all others. So if the last 8 bits change, so in this case, this 4, actually it would be 0 maybe. If this is modified, then I'm in this one-hop neighborhood to these machines, so in the same shared medium. So I could just vary that numbers that I have at the host part of the IP address and send out some messages there. And so there, basically, you can go through various elements, users' local address book, so email address, files from hard disks. Yeah, maybe it's a little bit more difficult where to look at, but you could also news groups, so everything that's registered in the communications. That's not anymore too accurate. But you could have a look at all kind of popular communication services. So if you have, for example, WhatsApp installed on your desktop machine, it could look for those kind of popular activities, or to open your browser and have a look whether it can act in the name with open accounts at Instagram or wherever you're active. But you can also scan IP addresses either in the IP range that you are in, so in the same subnet, and then look for vulnerable systems. Maybe also look for vulnerable specific versions of particular servers, programs, or just randomly create a random IP address and then try it out, whether it works or not. Often it will not work, but sometimes it will. So you just need to consistently and continuously test these random or not random IP addresses to try to send your own worm to that machines. So how can you send your worm to that machine? So either use some exploits. So we had the example with the SQL slammer that at that time was addressing the vulnerabilities in the SQL server. You can send emails. You can use direct as a simple mail transfer protocol to send emails. Social networks, Instagram, if you have any kind of credentials and open cookies that allow you to interact with your social networks without logging in, that could be used to open up the browser and try to automatically call the right pages and then to try to send some messages. Social networks, peer-to-peer networks, not anymore too popular, but that would be also one option to set up some kind of file sharing service that you're not really aware of, and then provide access to that warm infected file, claiming it's a popular title. Using backdoors, that's a little bit less common. But the goal is, I mean, you don't have to be very precise. You just send out many messages to potential victims, and that should be often it. And if you go for social vulnerabilities, basically attacking the trust of people, that's probably your best choice if you would be an attacker. So, what's the next step? So basically, by this, the attacker creates some kind of software that spreads from machine to machine with more or less success. But ideally, for an attacker, the number of machines that are under your control do not decrease, and you just get more and more machines over time. And depending on how successful the worm is, it's more. Also, you get more or less quick adaptations. So, what's the next step? So you are basically creating a set of available bots that you can control. That's your goal, and then you want to remote control them. So what you can do is either to have special web pages where the bots periodically look up what their command is, and typically and or public forums, news groups. So the idea is, so some chat rooms, peer-to-peer networks again. So the idea is that the bots, they look up some kind of data at some, let's say, centralized element, centralized point, and the attacker drops the information there. But it can be also more subtle, that so basically the attacker that do not want to expose their identity, obviously. So we also discussed, I think, in the context of steganography, that the commands can also, many examples of actual in-place steganography are also related to botnet communications. So where basically the attackers put in some forums some trivial-looking posts, but by knowing the key, how to recombine, how to interpret the letters or the meaning. I mean, there's a hidden information inside. That might be some command what the bots should do. And so the attacker could try to update basically the bots, what they should do, what kind of third-party site they should attack, let's say, and even to delete all kind of information that reveals where they got that information from. So it's basically quite difficult to identify then the attacker afterwards. So, any idea how could you protect against worms? What would you do? I mean, it's very, so what can you look for? So basically, what's the difference between a worm and a virus? A worm communicates over the network to try to attack other files, other systems. So one way would be to look for anomaly in the communication patterns, to look for strange patterns in the communication. On the other side, it's still a virus somehow. It's a subset of viruses. They are still self-replicating, but they're using the network for it. So it's you could as well look for some kind of signatures, some kind of instruction patterns. That would be one option. And the second element, so to apply the same patterns and same approaches that you have for viruses, and in addition, you can look for network behavior. So this is some kind of dynamic vulnerability detection. So to see how do the programs behave, again, in a sandbox environment, what kind of access pattern do they have to the memory, to other files that would identify a virus, and what kind of traffic behavior, network behavior do they have that would expose some kind of worm. So use firewalls to identify and to block connections to unwanted domains and IP ranges, intrusion detection systems to identify strange patterns, and system hardening is always a good choice. So to minimize the vulnerability of systems by basically shutting off unwanted services and configuring wanted services in a way that the things that you don't want are disabled, or that the minimum security requirement is strengthened. Okay, so let's make a cut. So viruses and worms have the goal to self-replicate. Now we come to Trojans. So Trojan horse comes back to the antique story of how Troja, wasn't it? Yeah, was defeated. Was it Troja that was defeated, or were the Trojans defeating which country, which city did they attack? I'm a little bit confused now myself. I just know it was about Helena, the beautiful princess that was kidnapped, and then they went there to get her back. I think the Trojans were.
The Greeks used to trick the
So it was a Greek horse in Troja.
Greek horse in Troja.
Okay, so the Greek horse in Troja. So basically, the Trojans kidnapped, I think, Helena to because she was so beautiful, and then the Greek went there and they besieged the city for various months and years, maybe, I don't know. And then as a sign of peace, and they want to give up, basically they built this large wooden horse that was then festively carried into the city. And in the night it turned out that soldiers were hiding in that horse, in that wooden horse, and they killed the people there. And basically they caused some havoc and some kind of damage. So the point is, a Trojan horse is camouflaged as having some useful function. It looks like a nice program that do some wanted, desired functionality, and basically it has a hidden meaning. It has an additional function that is not displayed, that is run without the consent of the user and without knowing the user what this functionality is. So for example, it could be a very nice screensaver that in addition logs your key entries, so to have a keylogger and send it somewhere. So it has one function that it presents and one function that it does not, and the additional function is typically harmful. But they do not want to self-replicate, so that's the difference. Any executable can have a Trojan, so some say also, I mean, Windows sending out some kind of user reports or diagnostics or whatever is some unwanted feature, but at least they communicate it. So it depends what you consider as a Trojan horse, because sometimes it's really a magnitude of functionality that software have, and typically Trojans are hiding in kind of I don't know. It's difficult to differentiate if there's no transparent activity, if it's not communicated what it does, and you find out that there has been some hidden activity that could be counted as a Trojan. So the additional functionality range from backdoors, so that somebody remotely can log into your system, to infection with viruses, worms, to building botnets, can be anything. So that's just some random additional functionality. So how can you protect yourself against that? Any idea? So what can we do? So again, we have two kind of approaches for that. Approach number one is very similar to viruses, to have these kind of files that are known for this unwanted activity as some kind of to detect their signature, to know their software parts, the instructions that cause this problem that can be detectable by antivirus scanners, and then again to have some kind of dynamic assessment of what is going on in the software, what kind of access to memory, to files, to network does it execute, so that strange or suspicious activity can be raising an alarm. So this is some kind of more social compatible suggestion. So if you get some files from shady sites, then the files might contain some shady activities, obviously. So you need to actively start it. They are not self-replicating, so you need to actively participate in that attack. So it's just on the social level side, make sure that where you download your files, and do not trust any kind of sites, and second, have an antivirus software running. Okay, coming to the botnets. So we have been talking about it several times. So now viruses have one focus as to create a botnet, maybe to spread exponentially, and then so viruses might have the hope to be copied over to other systems, and then to increase the number of hosts attached to the botnet there. Worms have a much higher focus on and applicability for botnets. So as they anyway spread through the network, they try to access hosts and affect them, so that they could be also maybe part of a botnet. Trojans, maybe it's a little bit more complicated to spread them without the self-replicating aspect. But let's say that an attacker builds a software that continuously tries to add more and more new hosts to this botnet. The goal is to have them under control. And what do they do with it? Either they could send a lot of spam mails, maybe even using the emails of the regular users of those hosts. They can start distributed denial of service attacks. So the goal is for an attacker always to have more resources than the victim. And if they have some amplification factor by maybe even involving third parties that have a larger response than the request, and they can send it to the victim, that's even better. So they try to maximize their resources. Obviously, they can also tap confidential data from infected machines. They can, for example, consistently look into the network traffic for some kind of credit card information that they send somewhere. They can also use some kind of hosting of criminal websites at the bots, so that if law enforcement steps in and tries to shut down those services, then they just identify some kind of victim who didn't know that he or she were hosting this kind of website. Okay, so quite straightforward. Let's have a look how this command and control structure looks like. So what they typically have is they have these bots, then they have the bot master, and then there's this command and control where they can send in software updates for new functionality. They can send all the commands, spam, mail, text, recipient addresses, and so on, or to communicate who should be attacked for the distributed denial of service attack. Okay, so in this command and control communication, this is some kind of critical element, because the bots, it would be easier for the attacker if the bots would just have autonomy somehow, and they don't need to be communicated with, and they just know what they should attack. But obviously that doesn't work. So the bot master has to communicate to those bots, and this is some point where he can be identified potentially. So therefore, typically they apply some kind of indirect communication where there's a service that they communicate with, which the service might be supporting some kind of anonymity. So if you have an anonymous website that you can visit, upload some kind of comments. These comments could contain some kind of stenographically hidden information that the bots also visit, and that can be then interpreted as commands, what they should attack. So Internet Relay Chat is still ongoing. That's still a protocol that can be used. It's a little bit less common, let's say, so that might be easier to detect, but they could log into some kind of chat room. I mean, that doesn't have to be this protocol specifically. Maybe it can be also WhatsApp. Maybe it can be, I mean, you can think of other kind of, WhatsApp is probably not good. It's associated to telephone numbers. But let's say if it's pure communication based, maybe there's some kind of forum where you can post your interesting elements, what you want to communicate. I don't know, probably some offerings of, I don't know what kind of, something like Kleinanzeigen, something like Craigslist, where you can just offer something and communicate indirectly with others. Then the bot master can upload his data, and the bots, so it can be all hidden, of course, using steganography, and the botnet can be accessing this website at specific addresses, and then to look, is there something new that we could utilize. So what are the problems? So the problem is, on one side, this single point of failure. So if this point is identified and it's shut off, then there's no, so if you don't have a backup channel, then the communication to the botnet is lost. So sometimes it's, for the attackers, they try to diversify the communication channels. On the other side, it's also difficult to not be identifiable by these communication channels. So you want to somehow still maintain some anonymity, obviously. because it's a problematic aspect. So if let's say law enforcement knows that this chat channel is used to communicate between botmaster and botnet, then they can have a look which hosts are connecting to this website, and then they know which owners they should write to somehow perform some security update. So what can the attackers do then? Decentralized applications. This is always some way that circumvents censorship. In this case, it would be, of course, good to censor the botmaster, but in other aspects, censorship is maybe not good. So there are decentralized approaches where you do not have a single point of failure. And if you combine it with steganography, so that there would be some kind of plausible deniability, so that you can claim I did not. So this is just a regular text. I did not upload anything critical, and the bots also download just this unsuspiciously looking text. Then it's difficult to show that there is really something going on. So the question is also how decentralized applications can be done. Let's have a look. So very quick outlook on decentralized systems. What you could of course do is to diversify where you communicate to. So if you would not have just one website, but you have, let's say, 200 websites, then probably you might catch one website. So if you create some kind of rendezvous point, so the bots are maybe listening to a set of websites in some kind of diverse manner, and the botnet, the botmaster sends the messages to all of these. Then even if you switch off one of the sites, you can still communicate. Another approach would be for decentralized communication that is difficult to censor is how the file sharing network evolved after Napster. Do you know how Napster was set up? So around 2000. So the idea of Napster at that time for file sharing of MP3 files was that the machines connected to a server, and then they said, I have this MP3 file, I don't know what was popular at that time, Britney Spears, NSYNC. So they can say they have these files, and the Napster server just listed which IP address or which host is hosting which file. But the server itself did not contain any copyright infringing material. It was just IP address and names. And if somebody wanted to download, I don't know, NSYNC, do you know that band? Is it your, okay. So then they sent a request, please give me the IP address of host that provide this NSYNC music, and you got a list of offers, and then you could download it. And that was one problem. How would you shut off such a system? How would you censor the access to, how would you stop the exchange of such, of this copyright infringing MP3 files?
You have to shut down the server.
Yeah, they shut down the server, very simple. And then typically in computer science there's sometimes a backlash, so they try to swing to the other extreme. And what they did at that time was Gnutella with G. So it was very simple. So basically you had a very fully decentralized network where there was no single element that were more important than the others. So it was really a purely fully decentralized network. Ah, now it's gone. It's a hit. I hate PowerPoint. This is really. So what they did is, if you have a Gnutella network, and then you have a fully decentralized network, so it's really just like a random graph. So I don't know, like this maybe. So, and the idea was to flood the network and asking who does have this file. And if you identified, I don't know, 5, so you cannot control who's getting that request. But once you got, so basically, if this node is flooding, then it contacts all of its neighboring peers. And they contact their neighboring peers, and then they will report back, I have the file. So you get typically, if the file is available, quite some large number of replies. And then you can select and then try to directly connect. So, and if you take out one of these nodes in the middle, then the network is still connected and it still works properly. So why it cannot be censored is because as long as the network is somehow connected, and typically they have not just 3, 4 connections as this depicted here, but much more, you can take out any node and it has no effect on the whole system. But what would you say would be the drawback in such a network? Yeah, you flood the network. That's a pro and con. I mean, if you flood the network, then the problem is that the more nodes join, the more flooding goes on, and then almost all the time you are flooding for the requests of others, and you have less download capabilities. So the next step was to create some kind of structured network, such as this is a structured overlay. And the simplest one is a chord. This is very much like a ring. So they are still popular. So many file sharing networks still operate on this. So one of the most common file sharing overlay nowadays is Kademlia. And how it is very roughly, so this is not pure Kademlia because it's a little bit more complicated, but chord was the forefront in this sense. So what it did, it just created a range of of ID ranges. Let's say this peer is responsible for these numbers, and this is responsible. So they just build a ring. 1, 4, 3, 7. I don't know. This just by random. So depending on which IP ID they have, they just form a ring, and basically together they are covering the whole ID space. So if your ID is 160 bits long, then the ID is just shared among all. I mean, the ID range is fully separated, fully split among all of the participants. And if a new node joins, they just simply join in, and then you split the responsibility. So basically then their responsibility range would become smaller. Okay, and now how Botmaster could use this. It creates an object at a specific ID. I don't know, 9787. And whoever is responsible for this object, one of the network participants will be responsible for it. You send a message there, and all bots are looking it up and trying to get the information that you place there. Of course, in the network sense, it's not staying like this, so it's not just purely a ring, because that would be inefficient, but they have some kind of shortcuts to be able to route to the desired ID they want to reach, the responsible peer they want to reach, by every step they make, every contact, one hop they make, they can halve the distance to it. So, and this is, again, it's cannot be shut off, because typically you have quite some redundancy, and if this fails, then you have some kind of backup and so on. So it's a little bit more efficient. You don't flood the network, you have a clear responsible peer. It's a little bit more effort, because you have to place the data there. You just not keep it yourself, you have to place it actively there. But then the lookup is also easy. So this is all both storing and retrieving is in logarithmic complexity, in contrast to flooding, which is O of n or n squared, depending on what you count. So there are many decentralized approaches how data can be shared, and basically it's simple. If you combine it even with steganography, then it's more difficult to detect it. What can be done still is you cannot stop the decentralized communication. You cannot stop. You cannot break down the network, but you can identify that you are communicating to some not web server, not using certificates, so it's just some kind of decentralized communication is ongoing, so that could be detected. Okay, so one example is Stormworm, and what it did is, so it started in 2007, it's a little bit, I mean, newer versions obviously have much more complexity, but this is a nice example to showcase. There are two purposes: sending spam. It still pays off. So there's some kind of studies that say that 0.1% really interact with spam and buy something. So every 1,000 email you get some money, and that makes it worth to operate it because you don't have the sending costs and denial of service attacks that somebody can buy to stop their competitors' business. So how did they operate? They used the file sharing network. We also did some studies. Study one on this eDonkey 2000. It was what was quite interesting. If we were looking for specific files characterized by their hash, this file sharing network was even more providing more results than Google was for the file identifier. So we were able to identify more and find more files based on their hash using this file sharing network than Google. That was quite interesting. That was a file sharing network. There were some file offerings. You could download it directly, and they on one side hijacked it, so they used it for their files, and later on they had a very similar network themselves on the same technical basis, but not interacting with the file sharing, illegal file sharing activities. So, yeah, and here's the example. So how this structured overlay or distributed hash table works. So what is a hash table? Typically what the hash table is you have an O of 1 access to a table. That means if you know the key and you want to get the value can also be a file, then at least locally you just need O of 1 access time. So this is very efficient file structure, but in a decentralized environment, what is typically done is that you split this file, this data structure into various elements. So, and this is in charge. So peer number 1 is in charge of this. Peer number 2 is in charge of this. Peer number 3 is in charge of this. There's some delay in. Oh, I know why there's a delay. So you separate the responsibility, and the goal is then just to identify, okay, how do I get to the peer, to the node that is in charge of that portion that is responsible for my key. So let's say my key is in this box. So these are typically numbers ranges, so 0 to, I don't know, just make some numbers up, and 672 to 1051, and then 1052 to 2307. I mean, there's some patterns how this is created so that it's roughly the same sizes. And then you can also have some kind of backup nodes. So if P3 fails, then P2 and P4 have also backup copies of the corresponding file. And basically what the goal is to have some kind of routing mechanism to find a responsible peer, and then to get the value stored under that key. So there's data stored under a key, and they can, it's not actually search, it's a lookup, so you know what you are looking for. So search would mean I don't know what the result will be, I don't know how many files will be the result, so I state a search for a specific keyword, let's say. That's not the case here, as in broadcasting or let's say flooding, but you say this is the URL or this is the key that I'm looking, and please give me the corresponding data. So that's just one response for that. no matter who stored it. And there's no central server necessary. There's also a lecture on that if you are interested in looking up. So, and in my playlists. So basically you can very simply create this decentralized data structure. And the nice thing is every time new peers join, the capacity of the network grows. So every new peer provides more storage space, more bandwidth to support the lookup and so on. So it scales very well. So you don't lose resources by more and more peers coming into the network, but you gain resources, and the clients that are able to query these networks are only the peers that participate in that network. So they have to provide resources to consume one, to resource resources. Okay, so what did they do? So it's stored in the DHT. The information in this distributed hash table, the information from which computer they could download a certain file, and the botnet generated time-dependent keys. So basically at specific times the keys were changing all the time, so that even if you identified one of the peers as hosting the relevant file at this time with the updates and the codes, in the next hour some other node might be responsible for it. So even if you would be able to turn off that machine at that specific time, after a time your direct access to the machine was useless. So the bots look up these keys again and again, and the data corresponds to the address and port of the CNC server. A little bit strange, because actually it could be also the commands that they would be able to send, but in this case it was the actual current address of the command and control server that has the actual commands. So the DHT was only some kind of address list to get the current address of the command and control server. But of course they could have also plant the commands at this network and be totally autonomous, anonymous in who has sent this data. So how did they use steganography? So they had the specific keys that they were looking for, and they placed an entry under this key of the file x mpeg, and size of this size is y bytes. That looks normal. So that's still a file sharing network where you can upload multimedia files such as a movie of specific size. But here x and y are two 16-bit numbers from which you can calculate the actual address. And if somebody downloads or information about the file, about this kind, so they don't actually download any kind of file, just this is some kind of meta information. Just somebody offers a file termed x.mpeg of size y, and who is offering it? It is an IP address that is associated to the command and control center, command and control server. So even if law enforcement would then see that file, they cannot really tell too much because it looks legit. And even you cannot somehow claim that they do some copyright infringement, because this x is a 16-bit number, so that you even then do not associate it to any kind of copyrighted multimedia or movie or music. And by this they can move the server anytime. They can share their new position by the file sharing network, and they're very flexible. Okay, so how to counteract this? So one this is tech issue. So of course, because it's dynamic, because there's no clear information on where the command and control server is, it's much more difficult to identify where you are currently. So I mean, to have a signature to identify. So you can change the contact details anytime. You're more flexible. That's a little bit a backside. But the question is, I mean, some software is running that continuously looks into the eDonkey network and looks for specific keys there and tries to interpret the results. So what you have a kind of pattern that you can re-identify. You can use as a regular antivirus software to identify that if it's not evolving as well. You can look at the network traffic, what's going on there, and basically identify, okay, if I'm having contacts as a machine to too many non-web servers, not servers, but private, let's say, privately, so ISP assigned IP addresses that typically belong to private people, then it looks like I have some kind of file sharing network going on. At least I could raise an alert. So what can you do to take over or cripple the botnet? So the idea is you try to identify which keys will be addressed next. If you are able to re-engineer from one machine the pattern by which these keys are computed based on the current time, then you could use the network to place your data at that position and try to create a counter command and control server that tells, let's say, the bots to delete the malicious code and to act normal again. So somehow to delete the malicious parts that it operates with. How do you identify the bot master? You try. So what can you do? So let's say, have a look, who is the bot master communicating to? The bot master is communicating to, do we have it here? No, maybe. I mean, the bot master is also placing its data at one of the machines in this distributed hash table. And if you're able to predict at what address these machines will communicate to, where they will place their data, you could try to get this position so that you identify who will reach out to you to get the IP address and so on, and then to follow up through the internet service provider who's in charge of this IP address at this time, who was using his internet for that. So with some effort you can find out the IP address of the bot master, but of course if it's international then it's more difficult to get a hand at that person. Okay, let's have another example. This is less a botnet. It's more a combination of virus and social engineering and Trojan, let's say. So very popular case. So is Stuxnet that took place 15 years ago, and what it used were 4 zero-day exploits. That means that those exploits were not known to Windows and other security elements, so that they were using some really unknown access pattern, some unknown vulnerabilities that didn't have any kind of protection yet. So this is some very valuable information for attackers. What it could do, it could hide from virus scanners and manual analysis, so it didn't look suspicious at all. And the goal was to sabotage very specific industrial equipment. Again, so times are repeating. So the goal at that time, it was analyzed, was to sabotage the uranium enrichers in Iran. So they had some specific machines used, I think, from Siemens with their control software on how to control some kind of motors there, and by some improper control of those motors they should get broken. That was the main goal. So how did it work at that time? So At that time, if you have some kind of, in Windows, typically you have some kind of icons, you know, that show a picture of your folder, that show some kind of tools that are connected. So let's have a look. What do I have? I don't know, 40 client, for example. You see an icon. And if I would log in, put in some USB stick, then sometimes also that gets an individual icon, how it is depicted in Explorer. Typically, what it also does is, in order to create that icon, it uses some kind of load library functionality that looks for in various places, also that current directory, and it's then executed with the idea that you want to generate an icon dynamically at this current time. So the intention of Windows was that if you want to have a very fancy icon, for example, you have your recycle bin in Windows that shows whether it's full or not, so it needs to compute something to know. And or you have an email icon that shows you how many unread emails you have. So this is something that needs to compute something to show that. And if you plug in some USB stick, that could also use this load library to execute something in order to show a much more user-friendly icon. Yeah, but it was not known at that time that it could be misused for some computation again. So it can be problematic. So I mean, it can compute something that goes beyond what is needed for your icon. At that time, it was really not known. Yeah, that was affecting that Windows at that time. But that is not sufficient. So at that time, I mean, you could maybe as an attacker use this element to compute something, to execute something, but only with your rights. But what you want to do is to get system privileges. So it's to expand and escalate your privileges from user rights to system rights. This is called a privilege escalation, so that you get higher rights, administrative rights, that you can execute more on that machine. So this is the next step. So what did it do? So what at that time Windows Vista was doing is that the tasks had some representation in some kind of XML file on the machine. Yeah. Okay, and there was a protection. So the goal was integrity, to provide integrity, data integrity, so that nobody can modify this XML file, especially not the rights associated to the tasks in the XML file, because it should have been protected. But this checksum is very, very simple. So it's not an encryption. There's no signature. It's really just a very, very simple checksum that is basically based on XOR. So how CRC is typically working is, if you have a, let's say, 32-bit word, and you have various 32-bit parts, then you take 16 bits and you XOR them, and the result is then so basically you identify what is the result. This is very roughly the result of the cyclic redundancy check. So actually it is. And obviously, so let's say if you have here the last bit 001 and here you have 110, if you XOR them, then a 0 comes out. But it doesn't make any difference whether you change the order of the bits. I mean, you can also have this, and this also results in XOR of 0. So the result of this XOR operation is very not safe. I mean, you can really swap bits. You can, if you modify this, then you can modify the last part completely as you wish. So it's really, you have quite a lot of freedom how you modify the data to still come to the same checksum. Okay. So next step. So what did it do? we don't look really into the code. But one element was to really go for this and then to modify the rights that were associated to the Windows task of this icon creation. I don't go into this now. This is I just want to pinpoint to some of the elements. How they also could take off is basically by loading keyboard layouts. So whether you have a German or an American keyboard or whatever, because depending on the keyboard layout, the index of where it stands is read and stored in a specific register, and this register is then called. So it's an in-kernel code, so this has root privileges or system privileges, and basically it tells, okay, this keyboard layout +4 should be loaded as a next instruction to read. So how can you take influence on what you execute with root commands? Is basically by selecting some specific keyboard layout or by putting some specific keyboard layout so that you can control where the execution of the system is continued. So you basically over the keyboard layout selection, they could take influence on how and what part of the code do they want to execute with root privileges. What they also did is to use various vulnerabilities for very old systems, because I mean in this industrial environment sometimes they are very old systems. There was a closed buffer overflow in an RPC server, but not the new, I mean the very old ones didn't have this bug fix. Otherwise, there were printer sharing. So what you could do is to use some Windows printer sharing, and you did not really send something to print, but you sent an executable that was attached with some kind of meta information, and that allowed to execute some kind of local, such as a driver update or so, for the printer. So basically, you just contacted another machine and told you have some shared folders, shared functionality in your Windows. Please use this printer, or I want to print over you, and install this driver for it to operate, using the rights of the printing user. So then again, they could copy themselves over to that machine, as in a warm fashion, and then execute through this kind of hidden or similarly looking element like a driver to execute that operation at the other machine. But if it was a guest, yeah, if there was no user logged in, then it was using system rights. So this file was executed automatically, executing that exe file that was provided there, and that was also not used, that this printer sharing can be used to basically start a remote machine to execute a file of your choice. So quite many elements, and then in addition they had some kind of HTTP servers in Denmark and Malaysia, and they accepted status messages, delivered updates, and were also used to deliver information locally in the network where the Stuxnet worm was operational. So it's a combination of some kind of virus, because you need an USB stick somehow to initiate the first attack. Then it has some kind of zero-day exploits, which were not known up front. Then it has some kind of command and control element that makes it to a botnet, and some local spreading, again worm-like. So try to reach out to as many machines as possible in this local environment. And the main goal was to attack the Siemens industrial controllers that were operating some kind of motors that were very relevant for uranium enrichment. So it was clearly targeting some kind of, you know what kind of goal they had. So, and the goal was to basically fluctuate between acceptable rates of the motor to somehow break the motor and cause some kind of long-term undetected harm. So, what did they do? They are running in industrial control, so that was the goal, to access Windows that is connected to this Siemens control machine that controls the motors. And once they're operational, they wait 2 weeks, and then they fluctuate between this time frame between various hertz and frames, frequencies, and to aim to damage the motors. Okay. So another term that has also been used is a rootkit, and the rootkit is something like the creation of a sandbox for antivirus software. So how do you avoid being detected? By having more privileges than the antivirus software, and every time antivirus software tries to see something, to act, it just creates a false illusion what's actually going on. So this is a rootkit, basically tries to hide the malicious elements of the system from the defender. So it has one privilege step more, it has more rights, it has more, for example, what it could do is even if it's loaded and booted, it gains already that right, and if the antivirus software is loaded afterwards, it already intercepts all of the system calls and simulates an unaffected system. So how they did this? They had installed some kind of drivers that were digitally signed by real driver manufacturers, and every system that would be capable to detect viruses and strange occurrences, such as Windows WinLogon or SVC host or virus scanners, would be presented false results to their system calls, to their lookup of the status of the files they are looking at, to present that everything's going on properly. So this is a rootkit where you really try to hide your activities. So typically you have the hardware, you have the antivirus software, and sometimes you run in a sandbox some kind of program, and then you can identify the virus if it interacts strangely with the system. Then you can observe it. But what the rootkit does is to interact with the antivirus software to, every time, let's say, the antivirus software looks up patterns in the code, it probably provides unrelevant information, or if it would ask for the network interaction, for the traffic interaction of one specific malicious file, then it would also report back that everything is fine. Okay. So, summarizing, what can you do against the worms and everything that we talked about? Step number 1, let's say we talked about antivirus software. What does it do? You have some kind of signature list or some kind of patterns. One moment. So, patterns. And by comparing the code with this pattern, with the signatures, you would identify parts that have been already marked as malicious and by which viruses could be identified. And the other element is dynamic analysis, where you actively observe how the system interacts, how the program interacts with the hardware, with system calls and so on. And every time there's some suspicious activity, you stop it. Very similar to that is also network intrusion detection. So that also uses this kind of signature or pattern list that looks into the packets and identifies whether there's some malicious activity ongoing, because the bits in the packet, the code or whatever, the bytes are so characteristic to specific malicious activity that they have been flagged as a red flag, and then you can raise an alarm. Or you could also, of course, you have also firewalls, but in combination with intrusion detection, you could also observe over time how the traffic behaves. So, for example, if you have had from some program, let's say you are talking about an email program, it's normal that it communicates to other email servers. Yeah, but if it starts to communicate to various ports and very strange IP addresses, typically also your email program is just communicating to one email server, two email servers, depending on how many accounts you have. But if it starts to communicate to thousands of email addresses, IP addresses, that's strange. So anomaly detection is one element. And then the look for malicious signatures. And the third element that you could do is to balance security versus how do you count it, being comfortable usability, let's say. It might be very nice to plug in a USB stick. It displays a nice icon. There's a pop-up. Do you want to install whatever you won't like to? Or it shows already some kind of thumbnails of pictures that are on that USB drive, using the big files that are there and putting it to some software and then creating smaller versions. It might be nice, it might be usable, but that all is a potential threat. So in any kind of activity that causes a threat, that you could take as a basis to consider, do I really need this or not? Do I really need to share a printer using my Windows, or should I turn this functionality off? Do I really need a webcam? Do I really need a microphone? Do I really need, let's say you have a kind of printer server. Do you need a webcam? Do you need a microphone on that machine? You can turn that all off. So typically there's this CIS benchmark that this is typically providing information for Windows, for Linux, for Android, and for all of any kind of machines. I supervise several topics in this domain. So for example, for Windows you have 900 recommendations how you should configure your system to not fall victim for potential risk by having services enabled that you don't use. So just as an example how hardening looks like, what it does. Here we have some tool from FP Pro, which are doing, it's a local company here in Bingen, and what it does, it offers you to check your machine for various vulnerabilities. So it goes for the CIS benchmark. What do I have? I think 19, Windows 11. Now it goes through my repository, my registry, and tries to identify what kind of vulnerabilities my machine has. There's this CIS benchmark, CIS Windows 11 benchmark, and it tells you, let me just see, where's the list? I need to see whether I have it already open, or do I need to register here first? I need to register first, one moment. So what CIS is, this is Center for Internet Security, some US department, and typically they give out for various operating systems and systems in general recommendations of what to turn off if you don't really need it. So it's still about you to decide whether you need it or not, and there are some companies that offer you their service to decide that for you in communication with you. And what they do is, so here, for example, I'm checking on my machine what kind of vulnerabilities I have. So all the various policies, so 900 policies there are, that can be checked. There are also some from FP Pro, there are some from so BSI, the German counterpart. Bundesamt für Sicherheit in der Informationstechnik, they also have recommendations of what services you should leave on or set as a minimum security level. And if you have a look at how it looks like eventually, so here I have some older results. So this is how my machines, for example, looks like. It's when did I run this? I don't know. So in January. So I could see that according to this benchmark, 530, I only pass 88 out of 530, and 434 are not passed. There are some BSE suggestions. There are some FB Pro from that company suggestions. And if you go into detail about what, for example, I'm missing, it's good. I'm using secure boot. There's a TPM chip ready. Great. What I miss is BitLocker is not active. BitLocker is not running. Windows Defender Application Guard is not enabled. Okay, great. Attack surface reduction rules are not enabled. PowerShell version 2 is not is still installed. Basically, it's about configuration management. So, which configurations did you have been chosen for this machine, and are they according to recommendation or not? And typically, the balance is really security versus usability. So, I don't know. So, very old file sharing, Windows sharing is enabled. Old SSL protocols are enabled. Even the null cipher that's not encrypting is still enabled. What else do we have? I think that's it. So let me just see if there's something else. So, and what they basically recommend is, so what is happening in the background here? Yes, let's have a quick fresh look. It's a very fresh setup, so it's still the same number of malicious activities that is available. So basically what they do is to look through the registry, check did you had your configuration set properly. If yes, congratulations. If not, then please change it. And that involves quite many elements, such as I don't know, interactive login with smart cards. That involves what else do we have? Enforce password history set to 24 or more passwords. What? So that I cannot choose a password that has been among the last 24. Okay, minimum password age 1 hour. Okay, minimum 14 characters. Okay. I mean, you see, you get all these elements that you are recommended to change in order to secure the system, and there are companies for that consult you for applying it in your company. So, and what is the benefit of this? So if you would have some kind of hardening in place, then obviously it would enforce that you have some kind of up-to-date antivirus program. It would enforce that there's some kind of firewall. It would enforce that various vulnerabilities are reduced, that the availability to the services are restricted, that worms can spread more difficult or not at all. And this is just common sense how to protect systems that are operational and that need to function well. So to limit the exposure of vulnerabilities. And then to apply antivirus and network intrusion detection systems to look for signatures, for kind of specific patterns that are known to be malicious, and maybe to look for anomalies in the detections. Okay, so what did we do in this chapter? We looked at viruses, worms, and so on. And then, yeah, basically to look at how they operate, what their goals is, how botnets, let's say, operate, what kind of countermeasures you have, again, signatures, anomaly detection, either on the host itself or in the network. But there's an ongoing cat and mouse game. I mean, there's always, as long as there's the incentive for the attackers to cause harm, to have some kind of benefit out of it by gaining money, they will do so. And the defenders are much more in a worse position because they have to close all open doors, basically using system hardening. That's really advisable to do. And the attacker just need to find one open door So this is, they have a benefit. One benefit if you are a user is probably be exotic. It has pros and cons. The benefit is if you are using exotic software, exotic hard operating systems and so on, you are less interesting for attackers because typically they create malware for the majority. So if they try to attack Windows, they have a much higher chance to spread. If you are using Cube OS or so, I know it's called Cubes. I think is it called Cubes with C? I think Cubes. Let me just see. This is something that is more recommended. I think it was with C. For example, this operating system. Cubes with Q. This would be actually a very prominent recommendation if for an operating system where you have, so I think even Snowden recommended this, where you just live in sandboxes. So you have basically every activity that you do is operating in a sandbox. So your firewall, some kind of Tor network, some kind of network stack, some kind of USB stack, some kind of, there's some hypervisor that allows you to virtualize all of these components. And let's say one of your applications, I don't know, this disposable application here in red that is unsafe and untrusted is attacked and hacked and you lose the control of it. It's just thrown away after your usage and all the memory is wiped. And you can basically specify trust levels to various compartments, and the compartments cannot communicate to each other if you don't allow it. So the more, to make it very secure if you want to, very exotic, people will not write viruses for this because there are so few people at all using this that doesn't make sense to try to attack them. So most viruses are written for Windows, the most popular operating system, and if you go for Linux or so, then the probability that you will find a virus there is quite low. So go for exotic elements, and that is also supporting that you are getting less viruses probably. And of course, always check where you get your software from. Yeah. Okay. So far for this topic, let's have a look and use a little bit the time that we have in order to have to sketch out what will be the last lecture. Yeah. So let's say have a look at the various the last step. So we will jump over some parts of this lecture, and yeah, this is okay. So what is remaining is the principles of cryptography. We had already shifted to the first part, so we will have a look at TLS and IPsec, basically. So these are the two remaining protocols that we will have a look at. So basically, we will start the lecture at around in the middle somewhere. Or maybe to ask you, because it's up to you. So let's see. So we'll look at TLS and IPsec and have a look at how security works in basically if you look up a website, how is our communication encrypted and integer and so on and authenticated, and IPsec extending it a little bit further to the element of tunneling basically between various sites, so one company, let's say, at various sites, how do they create one network that looks as if it would be connected, in contrast to TLS, which just looks like you are connecting to one web server and using one specific process, so this web interaction, but not, I mean, it's not one network in the sense that you can discover printers there also. So these will be the two remaining topics that we look at, and I'm happy that you have been here for this heat in the summer, and yeah, see you then in the exercise and then next week. Thank you.